So colourful and bright. That's how she's been described, right?
Definitely.
So
colourful and bright and loud. That's why all the bells are here.
Quinn Milburn Beadle was 17, described as bright and loving, and was giving every impression of feeling upbeat and happy. On the 9th of December 2018, the teenager left the family home in Shildon, County Durham, and attempted to take her own life by some trees just metres away from her front door. The area has been turned into a shrine in her memory.
You know, her friends are always bringing little things down and little cards, and I know her friends get a lot of comfort from being here as well. One of her friends works not far from here, and she says she, you know, in the summer she always comes and sits and has a lunch here, has a lunch with Quinn.
Quinn had been baking all day with her mother, Tracy. They'd been singing and dancing and listening to the radio. Tracy describes it as a typical Sunday. It was after 7 p.m. when Quinn left the house. Tracy thought she'd popped outside to have a cigarette, but that wasn't the case. It was around half an hour later when Tracy discovered what had happened to her daughter.
You know, it's been 4 years, and people think 4 years is such a long time. It's really not. I still wake up on a morning, and those first few seconds, it's like you're living your old life, and then you remember that they're not here. And we've just had to fight for those 4 years to find out the truth of what happened to our daughter. And we still don't know everything. You know, we think there's still things that
We're pretty sure that there's stuff that we don't know, still don't know.
And that's because in the months following Quinn's death, the family found out things they'd initially been oblivious to. The response from the first paramedic on the scene, Gavin Wood, had been called into question. They had no idea the North East Ambulance Service had carried out an internal investigation into the circumstances of her death. It was after 2 paramedics who'd arrived later had raised concerns about Mr. Wood's response. They believed he'd pronounced the death too quickly, without completing all the necessary checks. In April 2019, the first inquest into Quinn's death was delayed after the family found out about the internal investigation. Then in September 2019, they were provided with the internal report, which had concluded guidelines had not been applied correctly by Gavin Wood. Weeks later, a further tragedy hit the family. Dylan, Quinn's older brother, took his own life after reading the report. He'd told his mother he was haunted by its findings. A year later, a second inquest into Quinn's death found that the Trust's own protocol had not been followed. The coroner said at the point where the paramedics said she had passed, Quinn was not exhibiting any of the conditions unequivocally associated with death, and that the paramedic was not entitled to declare her dead without further resuscitation. Gavin Wood was struck off last week following a misconduct hearing. He's now taken the trust to an employment tribunal, claiming unfair dismissal.
Yeah, really close, yeah.
Tracy wants senior bosses to be held accountable.
People should have been sacked over what happened to Quinn. Heads should have rolled. And nothing's happened. Nobody's been sacked, nobody's been demoted. So my daughter died for nothing in their eyes.
The North East Ambulance Service says it's deeply sorry the care and treatment provided to Quinn and the subsequent review of the case was not handled to the standard that her family and the public deserved. It says we have learnt from this tragic incident and have introduced the appropriate changes. We've spoken to a whistleblower who was employed by the Trust until December last year. He claims more information has deliberately not been passed on to coroners to hide mistakes. Paul Calvert, a former coroner's officer, accuses it of having a culture of cover-up and bullying.
For my entire period that I was at the Trust, I saw evidence of that the Trust weren't being candid with the coroner or families. And my concern is how many cases that are similar to Quinn Evie Milburn or other families are still out there. Those families deserve answers and questions, and there needs to be accountability.
And tell me about how many cases you and your colleagues reported that could potentially
have led to death because of alleged malpractice.
So we've referred at least 90 cases to management at the Trust. Those cases vary from the case of Queen Eva Milburn down to less serious cases where documents haven't been shared with the coroner. So there's a plethora of mistakes that have occurred over a period of time.
The Trust says there's never been a deliberate attempt to cover up issues of patient care safety and hasn't seen any evidence supporting Paul's claim of there being at least 90 cases. However, it acknowledges there were flaws in its processes and says they've been addressed. Today, the Care Quality Commission delivered a damning assessment of the North East Ambulance Service, downgrading its overall rating from good to requires improvement. It says, "We were concerned the Trust was not always thoroughly investigating incidents and may have made decisions based on limited information." It says whistleblowers and patients' families had cited examples of incidents they had reported that had not been followed up.
Ambulance service, is the patient breathing?
I'm trying to feel the breathe.
Are you the patient?
Yes.
Right, what's happened?
Newsnight has exclusively obtained this 999 call made by a man in his 30s who was living in assisted accommodation. He complained of breathing difficulties and vomiting blood. It took an ambulance from the same Trust 70 minutes to reach him after 3 999 calls, but it was too late.
Just to let you know, we are extremely busy this evening. That's why there's been a delay on the ambulances, but we'll be as quick as we can, OK?
We can reveal an internal investigation into his death found that if treatment had started earlier, it would have increased his chances of survival. We also understand that his family had no idea about this internal report and its conclusions. NHS trusts must abide by what's called a duty of candour. Health and care professionals are obliged to be open and honest when something goes wrong and provide all relevant information for reviews and investigations.
We've got real shortcomings in duty of candour, and I think the problem we've got with it is the Trust sees it as an admission of liability, that there's wrongdoing, and it should not be that. It should be about just being frank with the family that harm has been caused. It may be avoidable harm, but it's something that they should absolutely be telling the family the truth from the outset.
In response to the CQC report, the Trust says it has faced a year of unprecedented pressures, but recognises there is more to do. It says it has fully revised the processes which had delayed the disclosure of documents to coroners to ensure that these issues cannot happen again, and is changing the way it investigates patient safety incidents and is strengthening the team with trained investigators. The Trust is under pressure. Last spring, its chief executive apologised for historic failings after whistleblowers accused managers of leaving out facts from reports. It's now waiting for the findings of an independent report by Dame Marianne Griffiths, a former NHS chief. It will focus on the deaths of 5 people, including Quinn, and is due to be published this month. But Tracy thinks the review doesn't cover enough ground.
Nobody's been forced to turn up. Nobody has had to speak under oath. And that's why we feel that even after this review, we'll still be pushing for a full and honest public inquiry.
Coroners depend on medical staff to provide them with all the information they have in relation to a death. Only then can they make an accurate judgment. In Quinn's case, that information wasn't provided at first, causing confusion and more upset at a traumatic time. Tracy and her husband David believe the system means more families are shut out from finding the truth around the death of their loved ones.
If I'd watched this in a TV drama, I wouldn't have believed it could happen in real life. I knew I just needed to get justice for my children. And I feel as though we're starting to get that. The paramedic's been struck off, but nobody else has had to answer for this. And yeah, he was the start of the problem, but he certainly wasn't the end of it.